Welcome to a grand conversation with Grandpa Diesel and Grandson Raphael, tackling current topics from a grandpa's point of view and from a grandson's point of view. Welcome. Hello, I'm Grandpa Diesel, and I'm here with
Grandson Raphael.
How you doing, Raph?
Pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing good.
Nice.
Okay, so if you were with us on our first podcast, welcome back. And so our first podcast, in case you missed it, was on AI, artificial intelligence. And so we wanted to just make a little clarification. And basically, you'll have to go back and listen if you have not. But we generally agree that AI has some negative aspects to it that are problematic. But one thing we wanted to you to know, as I guess part of our disclaimer, is that as we do research on certain topics and find statistics and things like that, we're going to try to avoid directly entering it into an AI app or anything like that. But of course, in doing searches, AI will give a result in the search depending on how you're searching it. Does that make sense, Ralph?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So again, we just wanted to make that as a disclaimer that there are going to be situations where we're going to be pulling information. It's going to be brought up by AI, but we're going to try our best to avoid directly looking at AI for the answers and do our own research.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Ralph. So, and also in the first podcast, we didn't talk a little bit about ourselves, so we thought we'd just briefly mention it. So I'm Grandpa Diesel, and I'm a retired pharmacist. I do a little bit of substitute teaching. We live in a small town, and I have 13 grandchildren, and Raphael is our oldest.
Mm-hmm. And I'm a junior in high school. Yep.
All right, junior in high school. Okay, right. All right. So today we want to tackle prison reform. And you might think, wow, went from AI to prison reform. Well, it's going to probably be like that in these podcasts. We're going to be jumping around, doing different things.
Yep.
But a couple of reasons. We both kind of have a similar perspective on prison reform. And also I've had some experiences with visiting prisoners, which I'm going to just start out with, and then we'll talk about prison reform. But so I went to West Virginia University, and while I was there, there was a group it was a minimum security prison, and I just felt like, oh, I would like to do that. And we would go and visit the prisoners there. And there they were actually had passes that they could leave the prison and then come back. So it was kind of interesting. And we actually I remember specifically one prisoner we took to a WVU basketball game, which maybe wasn't the best of decisions, but it went really fine, because if you know anything about WVU, it could get crazy. But we made it okay, and I think he had a great time. And so after that, and after when I retired a number of years ago, I thought, well, I wouldn't mind doing that, some kind of prison, going into the prison and visiting with prisoners again. And I think my main motivator this time around could be found in Matthew chapter 25, where Jesus talks about visiting those in prison. So there was a local university that they actually had students going to a state prison about 45 minutes from where we live. So I was connected with them, and I was able to go into the prison. This is before COVID. Then COVID hit, and then they stopped allowing visitors to go in. And then after COVID, I decided I'd like to keep going. So I have been going. And so in my scenario, it's a faith-based environment. So these prisoners are coming to a room, which includes a priest being there. And just to give you a little glimpse of how I go into the prison is, so I have to go in, and I have to sign in, and then I have to give my license, and they have a record of me, and I've done the background and everything I need. So I've been there for years. But they stamp my hand, and then they give me a name, a certain tag, and there are different colors, and I have a purple color, which means I can go into the prison yard without anyone escorting me. And so, but for me, one problem has been that I have had 3 hip surgeries, Raf. Does that
Wow.
make sense? I have 2 hips and 3 hip surgeries. Well, in case you're wondering, one hip surgery failed, so I had to have another one. So anyway, but so the hips, the metal in the hips actually set off metal detectors. So as part of going into the prison, you have to go through a metal detector, and of course my hips set it off. By the way, as an aside, I think one of the first times that happened to me happened to be in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C.
Probably a bad time to have
You think so,
metal
Ralph?
detectors go off.
And so hadn't even thought about it, and I don't know how long it had been after my surgery, but I'm going through this metal detector and it's going off, and of
Ooh.
course it's a flag, right, Ralph? And you don't want to be in a Capitol building, a metal detector going off, and so the guy was kind of patient with me, and I'm taking out all my stuff from my pockets, and I can't remember everything else, and I had no clue, and they're just standing there waiting for something, like, okay, buddy, kind of thing. It seemed like, but then it hit me. Oh, it's my hips. I have had hip surgery, and I forget how I said it, but anyway. So they actually let me go, and so since then I've gotten a piece of paper that says, in case anybody needs to look at a piece of paper that says, "Hey, I've had a hip surgery from the medical establishment that they've had it documented." But so one thing with where I go to is a state prison, and I go through the metal detector. It goes off naturally, but most of them know me, and so I have to go around the desk, and they get a wand, and I have to stretch out my arms, and they wand me with a portable wand, and then sometimes they'll frisk me. So that's kind of that. And then they unlock a door. I go into this. It's kind of like an air chamber almost, if you picture it. There's another door, but then I have to show my hand through a window that it's stamped, and then they'll let me in, and they open a door, and then I could go into this room. So in this room, it's called a multi-purpose room, is where the prisoners gather. And so one of the main things that I do is I just go around and I just talk with the prisoners, get their stories kind of sometimes, or not so much their stories, but just kind of getting, where they grew up, where they lived, and a little bit about what's going on as they're in prison. And so over the years, it's kind of been an eye opener for me, as far as talking to these prisoners, and I've prayed with them, and there are prisoners who I think have a heartfelt, deep remorse for what they've done, or for the reason why they're in there, and that they're just ready to improve their lives. In fact,
Yeah.
I specifically remember one prisoner telling me, it's interesting. Another thing is that he, and I think this could be the attitude for more than one, but that if he hadn't been in prison, he was going to, like, really, it would have been worse for his life.
Yeah.
So I think some prisoners view it as a place where they can make a course correction on their life, and once they come out, and in this particular state prison, they have different classes they can take and things like that. So but so that's kind of my experience, and of being in a prison system. It kind of has given me a whole new perspective. I think sometimes people just think that if a person commits a crime and they're convicted and in jail, in prison, that, hey, they deserve it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's true. Maybe they do. Yes, I mean, pretty much they do. They're paying for their crime. But what I've come to realize is I feel like there's an inconsistency in sentencing. It's an inconsistency, and it's almost like, depending on the judge who they have gone before, the sentence for one judge might be lighter, whereas the sentence of a different judge might be more.
Yeah.
So I think there's this inconsistency. So thus it brings us to prison reform and what we think is needed. So anyway, I'm going to stop my part talking here about my personal experience. I'm just going to turn it over to you, Raphael, and your thoughts and what you found in your research. And so go ahead.
Yeah, I think that, for one, I just like to say that's super interesting. I think it's very important to have someone who has actual experience with prisoners and, like, visiting them and stuff like that, which is something I would like to do at some point in my life as well.
Oh, that'd be great.
Okay, but I do have some statistics and some research to bring up. So a lot of this I got from the website prisonpolicy.org, which is actually super useful. They have tons of statistics, so I recommend you go look at that. Um, so in 2022, about 469,000 people entered prison gates, but people went to jail more than 7 million times. So as we can see, this is a major problem in the United States, that there is so many people going to prison. And you might be saying that this is actually perfectly fine, as these people are simply being punished for crimes, but actually crime rates have been going down in the United States, which I found super interesting, is that we still have so many incarcerated people, whereas crime rates actually are lessened. And I'm just going to break down a little bit about some of the specific crimes that people go to jail for. Um, so in state prisons, the majority of people are in jail for violent crimes. Second amount is property crimes, then drug crimes, then public order crimes, which is interesting because I've heard that drug crimes are one of the major factors in mass incarceration, but actually the statistics say otherwise. Drug crimes are a major amount of the incarcerations, but they're not the leading cause. And the leading cause is violent crimes. And specifically, these are in state prisons. There's also federal prisons and jails and local prisons and jails. But the majority of people, 1,098,000, are in state prisons. Now, with violent crimes, it's actually, when you think of a violent crime, you may think of like somebody shot somebody else or something like that. But actually, it is something a bit more nuanced than that. So, nonviolent versus violence, usually it's mainly used as a stand-in for a serious versus non-serious crime for a lot of people. And oftentimes this can actually be used in like a racist way as well, according to Prison Policy Initiative. And the violent crimes are actually very broad. Some don't even involve physical harm. Some states have like purse snatching or manufacturing methamphetamines and stealing drugs as violent crimes. And burglary is generally considered a property crime, but sometimes it's considered violent, even if there's nobody else present at the home. So violent crime is just very broad. And
So it sounds like those can be inflated, and what you're
yeah,
saying,
violent crime is so it's
right,
mainly it's almost a misnomer. It
right,
causes
right.
people to think that these people are like
Okay, right, right,
irredeemable or something like that because they've killed someone or something, whereas it's actually
right.
could be way less serious.
So in talking about prison reform, it's almost like that needs to be redefined, or more categories of
Yeah,
what is violent crime and what is not violent crime, kind of
yeah, it
thing.
needs
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
way more specific, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, yeah. And I just want to mention something about the drug, and we have touched base on this. Is that so the drug statistic? It could be. I'm not sure if in your research, but is it just directly people who have been arrested with possession or selling or directly involved with the drug as opposed to doing a crime? So the reason, what I'm saying is, I'm kind of we're trying to do some things in the local county jail here, and one of the personnel there mentioned that 90% of their population in the local jail is due to, I think, either substance abuse and mental health disorder, one or the or substance abuse by side. I think it might have been both, but anyway, high percentage. And we were talking about how even though someone is arrested, say they're arrested for burglary, but underlying why are they trying to steal is because they have a drug problem. So
Hmm.
drugs, would you agree, they are implicated in a lot of crimes? You might
Yeah,
not see it in the statistics, but
they are
behind it,
implicated in a lot of
yeah,
crimes.
yeah,
Also, I'd like to quickly touch on
yeah.
something related to drugs. This could be its own episode in and of itself,
Okay.
but in Portugal, they decriminalize drugs, which is
Mm-hmm.
important distinction between decriminalization and legalization. But
Mm-hmm.
this has actually reduced tons of drug crime, and there's way less. It's actually helped a lot with the drug problem and the way they've implemented it. But like I said, that could be its own other episode.
Sure. Yeah.
And so also, the way prisons are set up now, a lot of them are they're not very conducive to actually helping people not do crime anymore. So the way prisons in the
Mm.
United States are set up is they're basically punishments. They're meant to punish people for their crime. And you might at first think, okay, that's a good thing. They did something wrong and they should be punished for it. But I would like to push back on this by bringing up, like, does this actually help fix anything? Because if we look at a lot of the actual implications of this, so we have to look at recidivism, which is basically like reoffenses, like ending up back in jail, stuff like that. So recidivism data does not support the belief that people who commit violent crimes ought to be locked away for decades, for instance. So we put lots of violent people in prison, but it doesn't actually help, um, as a lot of violent people actually do 20% less crime than all the other crime categories combined.
So
So
you're saying like so in that type of crime they did one time,
yeah,
but that was it, and then
yeah. So for instance, according to prisonpolicy.org, people convicted of violent and sexual offenses are actually among the least likely to be rearrested, and those convicted of rape or sexual assault have rearrest rates of 20% or lower than all the other offense categories combined, unquote. Which the reason for this is because a lot of people do this when they're younger, and that as they get older, that they are more reasonable and stuff like that, which I think, because a lot of people, I feel like, even myself included, up until recently, had the opinion like, okay, they've done something horrible. That's basically, they shouldn't be allowed out. They're too much of a danger. But actually, that's not the case.
okay, and just so you know too is that when we talk about this, we're kind of talking about generalizations. Where every case, of course, is a case by case basis. And one of the things when we talk about prison reform are the prison sentences, and those again are case by case basis. But there is a point, there are some cases where a person is truly reformed, truly remorseful, and they may have another 10 years on their sentence. And so does that make sense? And I think that's what we're kind of looking at too in prison reform. Does it make sense to have years and years tacked on to, and a person just sitting in a prison, whatever, it may not be a cell, room, dorm, whatever, for 10 years of their life, when they truly are remorseful, and that they're not going to do this certain crime that they did. And there's an example of one guy, and I don't know what he's in for, but
Hmm.
I think his sentence is 50 years. And if I'm not mistaken, he's like, when I talked to him, I think he was 80 years old and has maybe even more if I have all the details correct. But so anyway, so that's one of the things I think as we look at, we could generalize, but also looking at specific cases too.
Yeah, and also I'd like to bring up that the country of Norway actually has a recidivism rate of 20%, while the United States recidivism rate is 76.6%. So if prisons were actually that helpful in their current state in the US, I don't think the recidivism rate would be so high. And the important thing to note is that Norway's prisons are very different to the United States' prisons, which is part of the reason why the recidivism rate is so low there. So, according to digitalcommons.unl.edu, drug offenses take up about 50% of American prison sentencings. This contributes to the country's mass incarceration rate that is 6 times higher than most countries. Norway, on the other hand, focuses on rehabilitating and treating prisoners' addiction, which
Right.
is one of the things that doesn't really happen as much in U.S. prisons. Um, and even jails as well.
Mm.
And it's not, people are just going to reoffend if you don't address it.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, prisons can cause more
Mm.
mental health problems that could lead to more addiction in the future. And also in Norway, the prison actual like architecture and the cells are apparently they're more like apartments than actual, like a small apartment than an actual prison cell, which, if you think about it, that makes far more sense. Because, like, who's going to be less likely to offend? Again, the person who's been trapped in, like, a small concrete room with some other person on a bunk bed for, like, 10 years, or someone who's been in, like, a small apartment for and actually getting the help they need. It's more likely that the person who actually got the help and had humane conditions and was treated like an actual human being is going to be less likely to reoffend. And that's another thing that I think is super important to remember, is that people in prison, they're not like, they haven't lost their humanity or something like that. They're
That's
still
a good
human
point.
beings.
Yeah.
And actually, if you like, people don't do things for no reason. A lot of people in prisons, there's some reason for what they did. Obviously, some people, maybe they are like, they've just are like, there's a few cases where potentially it could just be a randomly motivated
Right.
murder because
In
someone
the
wanted.
in the
Yeah,
moment they made a bad decision,
yeah.
poor decision. Yeah.
But if you look at it, in my opinion, most people probably have some sort of like mental health problem, or they're poor or something like that, that causes them to want to do crime. And one of the things I would say to actually help reduce this is if you actually helped address the root
Mm-hmm.
causes of the crime, rather than just addressing the criminals and punishing them for it. You try to take preventative measures to make sure the crime doesn't happen in the first place.
Yeah. So yeah, speaking of like the drug problem and trying to fix that is, and I think that happens even in our local area, local county jail. From the couple meetings we had there, is that a person might be arrested for a drug problem, for drugs, whatever, and then they're let back out after 6 months, and then they just do it again and do it again and do it again, get back in jail. So it's just a repeat process. But what I'm excited about our local jail is that they are very much in tune to looking at treating the drug addiction or the substance abuse problem. And they've actually have a couple of positions that they're trying to fill. They're called, I think it's like peer recovery support. And it's basically mentoring prisoners who have substance abuse problems. And the key to this position is that the person who is in this position has had a recovery experience themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So they've been through it, they're recovered, and now they're going to mentor the prisoners who are currently have a problem or trying to be in recovery. So I think that's an exciting, and it's kind of what you said, Ralph, is addressing the problem, not like it. So if a person comes in with an addiction and they're in jail for 6 months, a year, if you're not treating that in some way, then they're thrown back out and they don't know how to cope. And before you know
Yeah.
it, they fall back into this bad situation they're in.
Yeah, and this also, it doesn't just apply to like drugs and stuff as well. Because
Right.
if somebody is like, for instance, poor or like that, they can't get a good job or something like that, and they need the money to like support them or their family, and then they do a crime because of that and end up in prison, and then they get out. That's going to be on their permanent record and just make it harder for them to get a job in the future, thus making it more appealing to do crime so that they can get the money to support themselves, which will then potentially lead to them being in prison, causing them to have more on their record, harder to get a job, and it's just a cycle of um, prison and the negative effects that come from
Right.
it.
Right. And then you're coming out, coming back in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and also I think it's important to note that there is this thing called it's called a prison industrial complex,
Mm.
which is basically where the interests of uh, various parties align to basically create the prison system we have today. Um, so, and there's a lot of money in prisons. For instance, like lucrative contracts with like
Mm.
food companies
There you
or
go.
things
Right.
like that.
Right. Now,
Um,
we did talk about two private prisons versus government run prisons.
mhm.
And we were doing some research and kind of surprising, like we found that there doesn't seem to be a lot of private prisons, right?
Yeah, there's only
Yeah.
like 8% of prisons or something like that in the
8%
U.S.
8% of the inmates are
Or
saying,
yeah,
yeah,
something like
yeah,
that.
it's really low. So,
Yeah.
personally, I think of the concept of a private prison is like, so why would somebody have a private prison to make money, in the private sector, which to me, just topographically looking at it, it's kind of like, well, are the prisoners going to get the best care, the best chance of rehabilitation in a private prison where they're trying to make money and profit?
Yeah.
So, versus a non-private prison. So it's kind of interesting to find out that there aren't really a lot of private prisons. And from one source that I saw, it was actually, I think they said as of 2025, there are no federal prisons that are privately owned. So it seems to be mostly states or state by state kind of thing.
Yeah. Also, I would like to say that a lot of, if we actually look at it, crime isn't deterred by prisons. Like, statistically, there's actually even potentially a increase in crime by prisons slightly, which, like I was saying, it kind of makes sense with what I was saying earlier, like being unable to get a job or drug crime and stuff like that. So I would even bring into question the entire like current system of prisons as an institution. I think it completely needs to be changed rather than simply instituting a couple reforms here and there. I think we need to try to do broad sweeping reforms to try and address it all at once. You kind of get what I'm saying? Like, we can't just do one thing or another. We have to do a ton of stuff.
That's a good point. I mean, and I'm going to ask you in a second here. So, what would your ideal prison look like? But what came to my mind as you're talking is it's such a multifaceted thing. We talked about the drug addiction. Got to treat that. So how's that going to look? And another problem is when they say a person, they're reformed, they went through this rehab, whatever, in prison, and they're out, that they have a record. And so where is the problem going to be when they find looking out for a job?
Yeah.
Okay. So when they're looking for a job and somebody sees, oh, you were in prison, forget it.
Yeah.
I think people have that stereotype. And so it's also going to take the population in general to look at like trying to help a person. And of course, I could see them being leery, of course, but there's with some proper communication, maybe with the prison officials where they came from, and some direct contact and documentation that, okay, I'm going to give this person at least a chance.
And I feel like part of the problem is we in our society have been very conditioned to see prisoners as like inhuman people or like they're dehumanized and see
just a number.
Just a number, or see them as someone who gets what they deserved, or and part of that is like we see, and also like the system of prisons as something that's like a necessary evil almost. We see it like all in media and everything like that. There's prisons everywhere, and we've almost become desensitized to it as a concept. The concept of like the prisons, it has to be like this. It's sad, but we kind of need it. In this way, there's no other alternative when that's actually false. For instance, like I brought up earlier, Norway's prisons.
Right, and then also, not only jobs but housing. So I think a lot of times people may be homeless coming into prison, and they maybe have a substance abuse problem, and then they come out. They not only don't have a job, they don't have a place to stay. Yeah. So, I mean, that's another thing to address. It's like a multi-layered, faceted problem. And again, Ralph, I totally agree with you. I think, and I'm not just trying to stereotype the general population, but I think people just think, oh, somebody's arrested. You see it on the news. Yep, they deserved it. Yeah. Maybe in the back of your mind, yep, they're going to prison for 20 years. Well, those are human beings also. Yeah. And I know, yes, there are some horrendous crimes out there, and maybe we're not looking so much at those, but in general at the lesser offensive crimes, pretty much that, hey, there's something we can do here. And not only would it, looking at a person as a human being, try to find the source of their problem and helping them overcome that and become a productive member of society again. And right now it seems like that could be improved. So what would your ideal prison look like, Raph?
That's an interesting
Yeah,
question. That's an
yeah,
interesting
yeah.
question. So, first of all, I would say I would also just like to make the point that
Hmm.
quickly as an aside before I get into what an ideal
Yeah,
prison would look like,
yeah.
there is a movement for prison abolition entirely,
Ooh,
which I don't know
yeah.
that much about, so I can't exactly speak on that.
Hmm.
But that maybe there is actually an alternative where prisons wouldn't even be necessary. I don't know because I don't exactly know what alternative they pose or stuff like that. So I would encourage people to go look into that, and I encourage myself to go look into that. But if we're talking about ideal prisons, I'd have to say my ideal prison would be in conjunction with other things,
Hmm.
societal reforms.
Hmm.
So, for instance, the prison itself would be more like Norway's prisons,
Hmm.
but I would also argue for things like Portugal's drug decriminalization
Hmm.
alongside various social reforms such as housing as a human right to help people who maybe are stealing because they can't pay rent or something like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
Um,
Right, try to get to the root of the
yeah, try to
problem.
get
Yeah.
to the root of the problem. Various different drug addiction programs and education programs. And then there's also a program like there. I saw this guy Hassan Piker. He's like a Twitch streamer, political commentator guy. I saw him. He went during the California wildfires. He
Uh-huh.
went and interviewed these prisoners who were
Hmm.
fighting these
Oh,
fires,
yeah.
which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Now there was flaws in this program of fighting fires, like they were paid very poor wages and it was very
Hmm.
dangerous.
Hmm.
But at the same time, they also were being prepared when they go back out into society to get jobs as like a firefighter, for
Yeah,
instance.
there you go.
I would say increase programs like this,
Mm.
but also increase the wages, increase safety, and stuff like that. But have programs to prepare people for when they get back out of prison. And I would also say we need a concerted effort to actually change the way people think about prisons and
Mm.
prisoners, humanize them, stuff like that. Like I was saying earlier a little bit, it needs to be. It can't just be we make a better. We can't. We make a more humane prison, or we put in some social safety net so that people don't go to prison. It has to be everything. It has to be all at once so that we can lower the crime rates in the first place, and when people do crime, they can actually be treated like humans and have a good prison. Now I'm going to turn this back around on you. What would your ideal prison look
Oh,
like?
okay. I think, um, I think I would like to look at the sentencing. I guess this is before, but the sentencing, and I feel like there's so much variable and variation, and not,
Mm-hmm.
again, like I said, somebody who's truly remorseful, is truly has changed, rehabilitated. It doesn't make sense for them if they had a 20-year sentence and
Mm-hmm.
they're on fifth year. You know where they're at, and they've changed, and that they've got to sit there for another 15 years. This
Yeah.
doesn't make sense. So I'd like to look at that, look at the judges, and any variability there, like it shouldn't be that one judge is giving out this kind of sentence and another judge is less.
Yeah.
There's too much of a variable. So one person, for example, this is the details of the I got from this one prisoner, and it was just from him. So I believe it's true because he seemed to be sincere. So he was involved in a crime, which
Mm-hmm.
he they were going to give him 1 year sentence. So it wasn't this terrible, terrible thing, but he claimed he was innocent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so he just totally believed he's innocent.
Yeah.
So he didn't want to say he's guilty and take this 1 year. He
Mm-hmm.
wanted to fight for his innocence. So,
Yeah.
which is understood. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, and that's the other thing. These, where they make these deals, and okay, if you
Yeah.
plead guilty, you get a year. But he wanted to take it to trial, so he did, and he ended up losing,
Mm-hmm.
found guilty, and they gave him 9 years. So to me, that's talk about a reform. It's like
Yeah.
so just because he took it to trial, they gave him 9 years instead of
Yeah.
the 1 year. So and this was a specific thing and it involved police and things, but still, it just didn't make sense. He ended
Yeah.
up, and I knew him for a while, and he ended up did get out early. I think after 6 years
Mm-hmm.
or so. but still, things like that just don't, it's
Yeah.
at the whim of a judge or a court system of how they. So yeah, I think. I mean, just a real general, just quickly, like the prison system, I would like to see just overall, just kind of an emphasis on rehabilitation, getting to the root of the problem,
Exactly.
making connections with the outside. I feel like sometimes, so I'll ask
Yeah.
they'll have their last day in prison and they're just like dropped off somewhere. Like the system will take them on, or they'll be given a bus pass or something. I forget how it is, but they're taken to a place. Some of it is like halfway houses,
Mm-hmm.
but more connecting with jobs, trying to get them
Yeah.
a job, trying to get them housing, so that they can get back on their feet and become productive members.
Yeah.
And just in general, I think the population, I think we need to be, I don't know, more just like we've talked about, that these are human beings in these prisons also.
Yeah.
Just because they entered a prison, they don't become some kind of non-human.
Mm-hmm.
They're human beings. They need our help and attention, and they need to be, try to help them to become their best person. There's
Yeah.
a book about being the best version of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, to be the best version of themselves. And,
Yeah.
and again, and especially those who have made one mistake and they're so totally
Yeah.
remorseful now. Again, we're generalizing, but I think a large part of the population is like that. They've done something wrong. They got caught. They're
Mm-hmm.
in prison. It's almost like, what did I do? Why am I
Yeah.
here? Kind of thing. And then trying to really help them and to integrate them back into
Yeah.
society.
And I should add to my
Yeah.
ideal is to get money out of prisons and to get these corporations out of prisons. I want to bring up this
Okay.
from prisonpolicy.org. Quote, private companies are frequently granted contracts to operate prison food and health services, often so bad that they result in major lawsuits. And prison and jail, telecom, and commissary functions have spawned multi-billion-dollar private industries. By privatizing services like phone calls, medical care, and commissary, prisons and jails are offloading costs of incarceration onto incarcerated people and their families, trimming their budgets at an unconscionable social cost, end quote. So, well, private prisons aren't exactly a massive factor. There are still tons of private corporations that have their fingers in the prison industry from the even the public prisons. So I think that, and if we draw this to its logical conclusion, prison reform and stuff like this is going to be met with many of these corporations who are making tons and tons of money off of this, trying to combat that by perpetuating some of these myths, such as like, oh, these prisoners are unremorseful or violent, or this actual punishment system is better and helps get prisoners from committing crimes again. Whereas this stuff isn't true, but these corporations are going to lobby for that because they have tons of interests in this industry. So I'd say we need to get this money and these corporations out of this industry completely. People's lives shouldn't be so frivolous as to be used as to be contained simply for somebody's profit.
Right, very good.
If you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And again, I'm not saying at least that, a person who commits a crime should be in a luxury hotel.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, okay,
I'm not advocating for that either.
Right.
But
but there could be a lot of improvement, and
there
I
could
think
be
that's
way more improvement. Yeah.
What we're both saying, and also awareness again, that people are aware and just try to reach out and do what they can to integrate these people back into society.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the I know you've been naming websites, so I feel like I have to too. So one of the things I found, usafacts.org was a place that I got about no privately owned prisons on the federal level in 2025. So anyway, what were you going to say?
I would also like to point out that prisons do sort of, at least in the United States, perpetuate a system that I would even describe, in my opinion, as racist and classist. And what do I mean by this? So lots of people who go to jail, for instance, they can't they're poor, as they're doing they're stealing or something like that, or they may not have even done a crime. But they can't pay the bail or whatever. Whereas the more wealthy people, they can pay the bail to get out, or they could pay for a better lawyer or something like that.
Right.
Whereas if you can't afford that, you just get who you're assigned, no matter if you are, which could lead to, even if you're innocent, ending up in prison because you didn't have the best defense, or even if you're guilty, ending up out of prison, which because you had a really good lawyer because you could afford it or something like that. According to the sentencingproject.org, the latest available data regarding people sentenced to state prison reveal that Black Americans are imprisoned at a rate that is roughly 5 times the rate of white Americans. Mm-hmm. So I'd say that this perpetuates, once again, with the prisoners reoffending and stuff. This perpetuates a cycle, and this cycle ends up being racist, whether it's intended to or not. Which, when I say racist, I don't necessarily mean the people, the prison guards, the people running the prisons are out here explicitly doing this on purpose. But the way the system is set up, it just inevitably ends up doing this, whether it's intended to or not. It's almost systemic in its nature.
Okay. And then, so again, I think just to maybe conclude, we're not saying that, that we don't need some form of prisons.
Yeah.
At least I'm not saying that, but, and we're not wanting luxury hotels, but there's a lot of improvement for reform.
Yeah.
And also to me, if you're listening to this podcast, it's just, take pause and think about, your thoughts on prisoners and your own life. What do you think? Have you even thought of, when you see it on TV, this person's going to jail, have you ever given a second thought? And just to maybe spark something a little bit in you, maybe in your own capacity, you can make a little bit of a change.
Yeah.
In just, for example, in where you work, that, hey, there's a person who's coming out of jail or prison that needs a job, and I don't know, it might be just something little like that, but at least hopefully just to think about that these are people also.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think even just one person can make a difference. One person visiting a prison could help a prisoner reform their lives and reform their life or something like that. And one person alone might not be able to fully change the system, but let's say 500 people who spread the message, which then it's sort of a butterfly effect. The more people that actually are aware of this, the more people that can actually work to try and change the system. And I would like to also to stress that the system is very changeable, as I brought up with Norway, which I keep bringing up, but they have instituted a better system. So it's not impossible. We can actually change things for the better. But it just requires people to actually be educated on it and stuff like that.
Motivated
to do it. Yeah. I think I recommended this at the end of the first podcast also, but everyone should look into this themselves, do their own research, stuff like that. And also, if you can, get involved somehow and actually try and help to improve things.
Yeah, to improve things. Very good. Yeah, you could do that on your local level. Everybody probably pretty much has a county jail or city jail and things like that. And if you want to get involved, just, try to connect, do some research on your own. Like you said, I think that'll be kind of at the end of most of our podcasts, right? Do your own research.
Do your own research.
If you want.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Okay, so I think next week it's going to be a little bit of a lighter subject. We're not going to tell you what it is, but
it's going to be a bit more fun.
Yeah, a little more fun.
Yeah.
So, but we wanted to hit this hard, and just both of us, thinking about it and things. So anyway, well, thanks for listening, and until next time, we'll see you later.
Yep, goodbye.
And don't forget, God loves you.